Across the wires and through the air, those who seek will find me there. Story, wonder, voice, and art, find the ears and find the heart. High in the green hills of Wales, there is a lake where, it's said, a magical lady once walked out of the water and into a young man's heart. The surface of Llyn y Fan Fach lies smooth as glass beneath the black mountain. But beneath its reflections of sky and crag, an otherworld realm stirs. Welcome, dear listener, to Wishcrafting. Today, we are journeying into the mirror of the lake to meet the mysterious lady who dwells in its depths, and then beyond to the enchanted Isle of Avalon, where Arthur, King Arthur, found his final solace. This is a story of women, of water, of magic, and of sovereignty. And before we begin today's episode, I want to take a moment to orient us in this journey that we have started together. This mini-series that I've been doing with you is an exploration of King Arthur, but not in the way that this story is usually told. Most people meet Arthur through the later medieval romance stories. The Round Table, the knights, the quests, Camelot as a glittering court of chivalry. And those stories are beautiful, but they are only one layer of a much older myth. A myth that has fascinated me for a very, very long time. So this series is really something that I wanted to do in order for my own exploration. And what I'm interested in here is the deeper current, the Welsh and Celtic roots beneath this legend. In our first episode of the King Arthur series, we began with the idea that Arthur is not just a historical king or a literary hero, but a mythic figure that's shaped by landscape, folklore, and the spiritual imagination of the people who told and who tell his story. In the second episode, we stepped into Annwn, the Welsh otherworld, that realm that sits just beside our own. We explored how early Welsh tradition understood that kingship, magic, and sovereignty were deeply tied to that hidden world, and how Arthur himself appears in early poetry as someone who could cross that threshold. The story of Arthur, when we look at it this way, is not simply a tale of battles and knights, and instead it becomes a story about the relationship between the human world and the other world, about the forces that grant sovereignty, legitimacy, power, wisdom, and sometimes terrible trials and truths. So, rather than telling Arthur's life in a straight line from birth to death, this series I'm doing with you is approaching the legend in a way that the old myths would, by exploring the figures, symbols, and places that surround him. If you and I were to transport back in time to a tavern that was attached to the only inn in town, say, and a bard happened to pass by, and let's say that bard has stories about your favorite hero, King Arthur, but this bard brings new stories, stories that you haven't heard yet. The magical sword, the enchanted lake, the prophetic bard, the Grail, the wild hunt, the sleeping king beneath the mountain. Each of the pieces, each tale, helps us to understand who Arthur really is within this myth cycle, and how he and the other characters can help us to navigate and relate to the world around us. Today's episode brings to us one of the most iconic figures in this entire legend, the Lady of the Lake. She's the one who gives Arthur his sword, Excalibur. She's a guardian of the other world, and like so many figures in the Arthurian world, she stands right at the threshold between magic and sovereignty. So, if you're ready, let's lace up our boots, head into the forest, and let's go meet the Lady of the Lake. Our adventure today begins in the quiet folds of Welsh folklore. You see, long ago in the green vale of Midfai in Carmarthenshire lived a young shepherd tending his flock by Lenny Fan Fach, which is a lake. Day after day, the young shepherd led his sheep to graze on the sweet grass right beside the lake, and during the still hours he would often find himself gazing into those clear waters, daydreaming, as you do. And on a certain calm morning, as the first rays of sun kissed the lake's surface, something stirred beneath the water. The young shepherd rubbed his eyes and, thinking it a trick of the light, saw that the waters had begun to part, and from them, from the lake, a woman emerged. She was radiant and unlike any mortal girl he had ever seen. Some say that her hair shone with an otherworldly glow, and that her eyes were as blue as the depths of the lake. She stepped lightly onto the shore, water cascading off of her white, shimmering gown, and the shepherd stood, transfixed, his heart pounding out of his chest. And in a moment, one instant, he fell completely and utterly in love. Whether she was a fairy maiden or a goddess of the lake, he didn't know, and he did not care. The only thing he knew is that he desired nothing more than to be by her side. The Lady of the Lake, for indeed it was she, regarded the speechless young man with a kind curiosity. She spoke in a voice that sounded like rippling water and revealed that she had come to offer him a proposition. If he would promise to wed her and abide by certain conditions, she foresaw that he would become prosperous and respected beyond imagination. The young man, who was nearly faint with wonder, agreed immediately. Sure, any conditions. He would do anything to make her his bride. And so the lady was firm. 3 things you must promise me, she said. First, you must never strike me 3 times. Second, you must never tell anyone where I came from. And third, I come with dowry from the lake. You must treat me and my dowry with equal respect. The boy, moon-eyed, of course, nodded eagerly to it all. Marrying a fairy from the lake was not an easy thing to do, or to explain to one's neighbors, but he did not care, not at all. He led her to his village, and soon they were wed. The union was indeed blessed. The lady brought with her a wondrous dowry. From the lake came herds of fine cattle and sheep, far healthier and more fertile than any seen before. Their farm flourished, and the once poor shepherd now had a bountiful livestock and prosperity. His friends and kin were astonished at his fortune, though they did whisper among themselves about his strange, new, beautiful wife. And over the years, the couple lived happily and had 3 sons together. The Lady of the Lake proved as loving as a mother as she was a wife, and all seemed well as long as the husband could remember to keep those curious 3 conditions. And for many years he did. But humans are fallible, and fairy rules have a way of being broken. One day they prepared to attend a christening celebration, and as they made ready to depart, the lady seemed hesitant, lost in thought, and the husband lightly tapped her on the arm, saying, "Come, my love, we mustn't be late." And that was it. The first strike against her. Gentle and without malice, but a strike nonetheless. The lady's eyes flashed with sorrow. Later at the christening, she suddenly began weeping as if mourning. Her perplexed husband nudged her in confusion. Why cry at such a happy occasion? But that was the second strike, however unintentional. After that, more time passed, and then some time passed again, and then again after that, and the family's life remained prosperous. And the lady continued to share her otherworldly wisdom in healing and farming, enriching the family's life and the lives of her community. Then there was a funeral in the village. As they left the graveyard, to the husband's shock, his fairy wife began laughing, a soft, sad laugh. Perhaps in her far-seeing mind she knew the soul of the departed was at peace, or found the pomp of mortal funerals oddly humorous. But the husband, embarrassed and confused by her laughter at such a solemn time, reacted without thinking and reached out and touched her shoulder in rebuke. The third strike. And in a heartbeat, the spell was broken. The lady's face turned pale as moonlight, and a terrible quiet fell between them. "It's time for me to return where I came from," she said. And before he could protest, she walked back towards the lake. The husband ran after her, pleading, tears in his eyes and their 3 young sons clutching at his cloak in fear, but she only turned to gaze at them one last time before saying, "Farewell, remember me," before she stepped into the lake, and a great mist rose from the water's surface to claim her. When it cleared, she was gone, vanished beneath the ripples back to the kingdom under the lake, and with her went all of the cattle she had brought. Each and every animal following their fairy mistress back into the water, leaving nothing but faint rings spreading upon the lake's surface. Her husband's heart was broken. His prosperity, seemingly gone in an instant, mattered nothing to him compared to the loss of his beloved wife. He and his sons would often wander the shores of the lake, hoping to catch a glimpse of the lady. Years passed. The children grew into fine young men, thanks no doubt to the uncanny wisdom their mother had secretly instilled in them. And though she could not live among them, she didn't entirely abandon her family. One bright morning, the eldest son saw a figure standing upon the lake's still waters, and it was her. The lady's face was sad but proud, and in her hands she held a book of herbs and secret knowledge. She beckoned her son to her and gave him the book, a volume of healing lore containing remedies and medicinal recipes beyond any known in Wales at the time. She told him that he and his brothers were destined to use this knowledge for the good of the people. They would become physicians, great healers, and indeed, under their mother's otherworldly tutelage, the three brothers, Rhiwallon, Cadwagan, and Gruffudd, I'm so sorry, those are Welsh names that I am absolutely butchering, became the founding physicians of Midfai, famed across the land. Kings and princes would seek their cures, and their descendants carried on the healing traditions for generations, even down to the 18th century. All thanks to the lady's parting gift. And thus the legend of the Lady of Llyn y Fanfach and the Physicians of Midfai was born. It's a tale of enchantment and heartbreak, but also of legacy and of feminine power and agency. Notice that in this story, it was the lady who set the terms of the marriage, a reflection of the ancient idea of the sovereignty goddess who must be respected. Never struck, never dishonored, lest the land's bounty withdraw. The young farmer's prosperity came from her, and when he failed her, she took that prosperity, that bounty, with her. Yet through her sons, she ensured a lasting benefit for the human world, the gift of healing and knowledge. And in this way, she remained an initiator and a guide, even from afar. Which, the more you dive into the Lady of the Lake, the more you will see this guiding from afar being a theme with them. And yes, I did say them. Welsh folklore holds many such stories of lake maidens, who, when you translate what they're called in Welsh, it translates to something like wives of the otherworld. This story is perhaps the most famous, but it's by no means the only one. These tales carry the memory of a time when water was seen as a gateway to the other world, a place of contract and covenant between mortals and the Fae. A well or a lake wasn't just a body of water, but it was alive with spiritual presence. And the women of these waters often personified the land's fertility and its fate. Now let us weave this Welsh wisdom into the grand tapestry of Arthurian legend as a whole. When we speak of the Lady of the Lake in Arthur's story, we are speaking of a title, not one single woman like in the story I just told you. It's as if the archetype of the Lady of the Lake, or the Lake Fairy, was adopted into Arthur's saga, most likely existing long before Arthur ever came into the zeitgeist of human consciousness and storytelling. And once it did, over time, this idea of the Lady of the Lake became several characters in the Arthurian cycle that wore the mantle of Lady of the Lake. Usually, when people are referring to the Lady of the Lake in King Arthur's story, they are referring to the enchantress who gives King Arthur his sword, Excalibur, and who plays a role at both the dawning and the doom of Arthur's reign. Different sources call her different names. To some, she is Nimue or Nineen. To others, she's Vivian or Vivienne. Whatever the name, she's consistently depicted as a mysterious, powerful woman associated with water and the magical Isle of Avalon. Our first encounter with the Lady of the Lake in Arthur's tale comes early on in his kingship, after young Arthur pulled the sword from the stone to claim his birthright, and that sword eventually breaks in battle, and Arthur is left without a mighty weapon. Merlin, ever the guide, is like, I got this, I know a place, and leads Arthur to a tranquil lake. They stand on the misty shore, and a single hand emerges from the silvery lake water, clad in the purest white, and holding aloft a gleaming sword. And then, just off the shore, a lady glides on the lake's surface. Whether on a boat or simply just walking or floating over the water, it's unclear, but the scene is very enchanting. A hand comes up, and then the lady appears and glides over to get the sword and bring it to Arthur. She's ethereal, and she's said to have hair like gold and a countenance that is considered to be very serene. Merlin tells Arthur that this is the Lady of the Lake, and that the sword is Excalibur, and that it's meant for him if he will only accept it. Interestingly enough, in more than one reference, when the lady talks to Arthur about the sword, she refers to the sword as being a part of her, or being her. Take me, she says to Arthur, but in return, when the time comes, you shall give me a gift that But in return, when the time comes, you shall give me what I ask. And Arthur agrees, because, duh, how could he not? And she grants him the sword, and its magical scabbard that it goes into, and when he touches this sword, Excalibur flares with light. Merlin tells Arthur that as long as he wears it in the scabbard, no wound that he suffered would bleed. A very, very, very precious enchantment indeed, because Arthur gets into quite a lot of battles after this. Arthur gives thanks to the Lady of the Lake, and she vanishes beneath the waters, leaving nothing but ripples, and Arthur is ready to set out on the journey of a lifetime. The journey of thousands of lifetimes, truly. And from that day, the Lady of the Lake becomes Arthur's silent benefactor. She arms him with the Blade of Victory, and the water once again serves as the initiator of a contract. Arthur's kingship becomes legitimized not just by the sword from the stone, which was his first sword and his sign of human lineage, but then by Excalibur from the lake, a sign of divine and mystical sanction. We can see in this the echo of ancient Celtic rituals, because kingship was often conferred by a female figure symbolizing the land or the divinity. And the divinity would be whatever divinity they called on in that time period for whatever reason they were calling. In Irish lore, the goddess of sovereignty would offer a cup or a token to the king, sealing his right to rule. And all of this was done in ritual theater style, right? So in this story, here the Lady of the Lake offers a sword from the sacred waters, which is a striking parallel to the Irish ritual of the goddess offering a cup or token of something to the king. And just like in this story with Arthur, the lady has conditions with Arthur, right? But when this Irish ritual tradition happens and the goddess of sovereignty offers the king whatever the token is, or the sacred water, the cup, there are also conditions or vows to be made, right? So lots of parallels there. Throughout Arthur's reign, the Lady of the Lake watches him from afar. She appears again later on, often to help the knights in their most dire times of need, usually. And it's even said that she raised the infant Lancelot after his father's death and took the boy into the otherworldly realm beneath the lake, only to then present him to Arthur's court when he was fully grown. In the tale, Le Mort d'Arthur, or The Death of Arthur, the Lady of the Lake is named Nimue, and she replaces Merlin as Arthur's chief enchanter after Merlin's entrapment. He goes through some shit, okay? Merlin goes through some shit. And so Arthur needs a guide. He needs a mentor. He needs a benefactor. So Nimue uses her magic for good, and she thwarts evil sorcerers, and she rescues his knights from dark spells, and forever remains a close ally of Arthur and his queen later on. And all that sounds well and good. Sounds like a normal story about a knight, story about an epic, chivalrous king. But there are darker versions to the Lady of the Lake. In one early story of the Arthurian legends, a mysterious Lady of the Lake arrives at Arthur's court during a feast. Remember, Lady of the Lake is a title. And while there is one famous Lady of the Lake in King Arthur's stories, there are multiple in this story and outside of the myth cycle of King Arthur and all of his different folklore and all the different regions. There are also regional ladies of the lake that have nothing to do with King Arthur all over the Celtic world. So, in a darker version of a story, a Lady of the Lake arrives at Arthur's court, and it's during a feast. She comes in, and she asks Arthur for a gift, a favor to be granted later, whatever she chooses, and for whatever reason, Arthur agrees. But after Arthur promises the favor, the lady immediately names her demand, and she asks for the head of a knight named Sir Balin. She wants Arthur to kill him, and the court is shocked. Balin is still kind of mysterious to the court. They don't know him yet, and they're like, what did he do, right? Because he's new. He's newly arrived to court and has done nothing wrong in Arthur's court. So Arthur himself regrets making this promise, but he feels bound by the word that he just gave this otherworldly, like, fairy lady. So before anybody can act and Arthur can actually make a decision, Balin steps forward and says that he recognizes the woman. The court whispers, hands go up, pearls are clutched, and he explains why he can't allow her request to stand. According to Balin, this Lady of the Lake is not the benevolent figure that they are assuming she is, and he claims that she had previously caused the death of his own mother through magic, and that she has also destroyed other knights before him with this very ruse. Seeing her as an incredibly dangerous enemy, Balin draws his sword and beheads her on the spot, right there at Arthur's feet in his hall. And the court, they erupt. They're in outrage. This is absolutely not how etiquette goes. And plus, she was a fairy, so who knows what trouble he just brought to them. So even though Balin is claiming that he's justified, he killed a woman, and he killed a magical woman, and he killed her under Arthur's protection. So it's considered to be a grave offense. And Arthur, who can't bear to kill his knight, banishes Balin from the court. This moment sets in motion a chain of tragic events that will follow Balin through the rest of his story, eventually leading to one of the darkest moments in Arthurian legend, period, which is the accidental duel between Balin and his own brother, where the two brothers mortally wound each other without realizing who they are, and dying without ever realizing that they're family and that they've been looking for each other. Very sad. But this version of the story reminds us that the Arthurian world is not simple, and its morals are not simple. While early Arthurian stories served as a tuning fork for social contracts at the time, Arthur, and those around him like his knight Balin, were still very human. This story also highlights a recurring theme in Arthurian myth, that promises and oaths carry power, real, deep, big power. Arthur's willingness to grant a gift before knowing the request nearly cost a knight his life and leads to absolute tragedy within and without of the court. And finally, this tale reinforces something central to the Arthurian tradition, that encounters with the other world rarely end cleanly, especially when you don't take the utmost respect and time doing things properly. Even a moment inside the king's hall can open the doorway to myth, magic, and irreversible consequences. Now you've heard a couple of stories about the ladies of the lake and their power. So then what of Avalon? Avalon, that I love to talk about, is the mystic isle that's intimately linked with the Lady of the Lake. In many legends, the lady's domain is Avalon, or it's heavily implied to somehow be connected to it. The name Avalon comes from the Welsh word afal, meaning apple, and Avalon means the Isle of Apples, evoking a place of plenty and eternal summer. It first appears in a chronicle as the place where Arthur's sword was forged, and later where Arthur is taken to be healed. In the Vita Merlini, Avalon is described as an earthly paradise ruled by Morgan, who is one of 9 sisters, 9 powerful enchantresses who live on that holy Isle of Avalon. Morgan Le Fay, in this early conception, is a benevolent healer, so far from the jealous antagonist that she later becomes in Arthurian romance. In fact, she's almost the complete opposite in the beginning. She welcomes her brother Arthur into Avalon after his final battle and promises to cure him of his grievous wounds. That's right, you heard that correctly. The Lady of the Lake, well, one of them, and arguably perhaps the most powerful, the Queen of Avalon, is King Arthur's sister. At least she is in some tales. Over time, Avalon and the Lady of the Lake became intertwined in the Arthurian imagination. In one version of this myth cycle, when Arthur is mortally wounded at the Battle of Camlan, which is like the final big one, a mysterious black barge appears on the misty lake and carries him away. When the barge appears, on board it's revealed that there are 3 queens, or ladies, dressed in black hoods. One is Morgan Le Fay, Arthur's sister. One is the Queen of North Wales. And one is Nimue, the chief ladies of the lake. If Morgan Le Fay is like the ultimate queen of Avalon, and Avalon is accessed through the lakes, imagine the ladies of the lake as Morgan Le Fay's priestesses, the most powerful, her second in command, that are doing the most work to guard the thresholds between the human world and her realm of Avalon. Anyway, these 3 powerful women arrive on this spooky, misty, dark barge to gather Arthur, who's barely alive. These women, these masters of enchantment, escort him to Avalon for healing, and he is on the brink of death. He is really not doing well. But this scene is a poignant one. Arthur is being borne away by the women of the other world, as well as the queen of the human realm. A powerful trio which is rich in significance. They are female figures that have midwifed Arthur both into kingship and out of life and through the portal of death till he's reborn again, which we'll get to in a second. In this, the feminine and the water bracket the Arthurian saga like beautiful, matching, wonderful bookends. Avalon itself is depicted as a place of big magic. In the early versions, Morgan Le Fay, Queen of Avalon, examines Arthur's grievous wounds and tells him that he has to rest in Avalon for a really long time in order to fully recover. She uses the herbs of Avalon and the inherent magic that they hold within them, thanks to the potent otherworldly soil they grow in, to put Arthur into a magically induced deep sleep state, so that she can kind of expand his life and do more healing on him, essentially. As well as ease his suffering, because in some versions, people don't die once they reach Avalon's shores, so instead of him being in absolute agony for hundreds and hundreds of years, she just puts him mercifully into a deep sleep state so she can do the healing work and he doesn't have to suffer. What happens once Arthur is mortally wounded and then taken to Avalon varies in some later versions of the story. In one French chronicle, Arthur writes a letter from Avalon to his cousin, claiming that Morgan has made him immortal and that they live together in bliss in Avalon's eternal spring. In another, it said that Morgan keeps Arthur's healed body for herself in Avalon, implying a lover-like union beyond death, because in some versions they are lovers instead of brother and sister. And with these variations, there's a consistent idea that Avalon is the threshold of life and death itself. It's neither the Christian heaven nor the ordinary world. It's that liminal space between, an echo of the Celtic otherworld, kind of like the Irish Tír na nÓ, or Land of the Youth, or the Isle of Man's legendary Evan Ablach, which actually means Isle of Apples too. If you want to learn more about apples and what they symbolize, go check out my apple episode, because I think you'll really, really like that one. Stepping back and taking a kind of broader look at these stories, we notice a really powerful theme. The sovereignty of women in these mystical domains is palpable. The Lady of the Lake, Morgan Le Fay, they're queens in their own right, and they answer to no mortal authority. They are the keepers of enchanted arms and realms, the wielders of healing arts, the judges and guardians of fate, and the undercurrent of magic itself. In a world of warrior kings and patriarchal feuds, these feminine figures represent a more ancient and enduring power, that of the earth and waters, which give life and can also reclaim it. Consider now how water functions in these stories. It's always a boundary. The lake's surface is a veil between the mundane and the supernatural. To approach the lady, Arthur must literally go to the edge of land and water, or journey on to the water. To reach Avalon, one must voyage across the sea or across a lake and pass through a mist where the world itself shifts. Water doesn't belong to any man, not a single one of us, and that is why it's the realm where the lady reigns. By granting Arthur Excalibur, the lady essentially forms a contract with him. Arthur can rule on land by her grace, but the sword and what it symbolizes, which is divine kingship, ultimately belongs to the lady and will always and must always return to her. Indeed, when Arthur lays dying, he instructs one of his knights to throw Excalibur back into the lake. And his knight is not so sure that he wants to do that. But eventually, he gives and he throws the sword back into the lake. But it's begrudgingly, like he really doesn't want to. But when it is finally, at last, hurled into the moonlit lake, a slender arm, yet again, reaches up to grab the sword, and the contract is fulfilled. The lone power is returned, and the water is contract. It's initiator, and then full circle resolver. Perhaps you can see now that the Lady of the Lake, in her various names and guises, whether it's Nimue, Vivian, etc., across medieval literature, has an air of the High Priestess or Fairy Queen every single time. Notably, in later romantic works like The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, which is a modern reimagining and a great book, the Lady of the Lake is actually a title for the High Priestess of Avalon, a role passed from one woman to another. It's modern fiction, and it was really, really interesting to read because it picked up on a thread from the old myths that the Lady of the Lake isn't one woman, but a station. Much like Merlin, in some interpretations, is a title for a chief druid. In those tellings, Vivienne is the Lady of the Lake at first, and then her successor is Nynaeve, and so on. The concept beautifully underscores that Avalon's power structure is matriarchal, and that it's fluid, like water, and identities shift, but their essence, the essence of this title, this station, remains. The Lady of the Lake is a woman who mediates between Avalon and our world. And if you're thinking, wait, is it a lineage or is there a queen with other priestesses? The answer is yes. Yes. All of those things are true. We have Morgan Le Fay, and then we have other ladies of the lake that are like underneath her in a way at different times. Then we have multiple ladies of the lake that are all on equal standing and equal power at the same time. And then we have a lineage that's shown to us in this grand epic story that has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years under its belt, which is why we have so many things to explore here, and why the answer to that question would be yes. The ladies of the lake hold multitudes, and their multitudes reflect how the lake maidens of Celtic lore were adapted into Arthur's legend at different points by different authors. But in spirit, they all hark back to those lake maidens or wives from the other world. And even to older goddesses like Coventina, the Romano-British water deity of springs and wells. Scholars have indeed drawn parallels between the Lady of the Lake and such deities, noting that shrines to Coventina were often at waters, and offerings, even swords, were cast into lakes as sacrifices, gifts, offerings to Coventina. The Arthurian lady, though romanticized, carries an echo of those ancient imprints and practices. Let us float on now through the mist and into Avalon itself, the heart of this story. Avalon is sometimes described as an island in a lake, or as an island across the Western Sea. In either case, water encircles it, separating it from our world. Envision Avalon as the sun sets. Orchards of apple trees in eternal bloom, heavy with sweet fruit, and the air warm and thick with the scent of apple blossom and herbs. There are 9 sisters who dwell there, and they're learned in healing, song, and shape-shifting arts. We may hear their laughter from across the crystal waters, or catch the faint notes of their soft choral singing carried over to us on the breeze. Avalon is a place of peace, where no one ever falls ill or grows old. It is, as the Vita Merlini says, a place of such bounty that grain and grape grow without tending. When Arthur is brought here, his body is laid on a golden bed beneath a pavilion of silk. Morgan examines him and tells him that they can heal his wounds, but that he must stay a long while. And Arthur, in a rare moment of surrender, accepts this care and accepts the power of these women. For all his life, he's been an active hero, and now he gets to become a passive recipient of grace, trusting in Morgan and the ladies. This is a return to the womb, in a sense. And in this, Arthur passes from history into myth, sleeping or living on Avalon, awaiting the time for his return. In Welsh tradition, there's a belief, recorded by many chroniclers, that Arthur never truly died, but that he lingers in enchanted sleep. Some say that he's in Avalon, and others say he's in a cave somewhere, and that in their darkest hour, they're going to see him rise again. This is Arthur as the once and future king, a messianic hope. But interestingly, in many of those stories, Morgan Le Fay is right there by his side, the immortal queen to the immortal king, whether it's as a lover or as a sister. Arthur's fate is intertwined forever with Avalon's queen. I think it's also worth noting that Avalon was later localized to Glastonbury in England when monks in the 12th century, is anybody surprised to hear it was the Christians? No. Claimed to find Arthur and Guinevere's graves there. Yeah, okay, that's fine, but they spun a tale that Avalon's other name was the Isle of Glastonbury, and that Morgan merely carried Arthur there to be buried. Sounds like a ploy to attract pilgrims to me. One that probably worked really well, considering that the mystical legend of Arthur and Avalon is incredibly compelling. Now, others say that Avalon could have been inspired by memories of an ancient misty isle in the Celtic world that has been lost, and that it forever remains half in our world and half out. The Lady of the Lake and Avalon leave us with a rich legacy in Arthurian tradition. They imbue the narrative with a sacred feminine principle. And while the knights charge about on quests and kings battle for thrones, the real mystic authority lies within these women, these powerhouses who stand just off stage. Feminine sovereignty is a theme that is woven through these stories right beside King Arthur's tale. Right beside the kingship is a queenship. From the Lady of the Lake granting the sword, and thus kingship, to Arthur's first queen, Guinevere, whose choices shape a kingdom, to Morgan Le Fay and her sisters, determining Arthur's fate. This suggests that the true right to rule comes not only from blood and conquest, but from a deeper harmony far, far, far into the core of the land's spirit. One might even say that Arthur's failure, in part, was losing that harmony, that the downfall of Camelot comes from the estrangement. Again, we see that Arthur's power is bestowed, and when it leaves him, in whatever way it does, it always goes back to her. Capital H, her. In cultural memory, I think that these images are incredibly potent and that they still hold relevance. We still speak of Avalon as a utopia of healing and harmony, and we still talk about Arthur's sword and the story of where it came from, especially in modern fantasy. I could probably think of a dozen films and books that call upon this very story as their backbone. The Lady of the Lake has remained an archetype of the powerful sorceress, at times benevolent, at times fatally alluring, and always inspiring countless stories, paintings, operas, films. One can find pre-Raphaelite paintings of Nimue enchanting Merlin, or Arthur on the barge to Avalon with those three figures, replete with watery symbolism and ethereal maidens. each one a tribute to that enduring fascination with the feminine mystery in Arthur's saga. The Lady of the Lake and the Isle of Avalon invite us to ponder the otherworldly depth beneath Arthurian adventure. They remind us that behind every sword and every crown there is a deeper magic, one that flows from wells and lakes and tended by wise women who measure out destiny. In discovering Arthurian myth, we find not just knights and battles, but we find apple trees, we find still and babbling waters, and we find voices of women singing, chanting, and declaring themselves from beyond the mist. These are the sights and the sounds of a living tradition, one where the wisdom shared by women and the land is respected, and one where surrendering to life's cycles and surrendering to one's self can be seen as a victory, among many, many other poetic things. When we visit this story, especially for the first time, as the boat bears Arthur into the fading twilight, with Nimue and Morgan and the Queen of Wales at his side, we're left with a feeling of this not being quite an end, but instead of a beautiful uncertainty. Perhaps on a quiet evening, if you wander to the edge of a lake and kneel to watch your reflection, you just might catch a ripple. Perhaps you might see a hand beneath the surface, a lady on a shadowy edge, waiting to bestow a gift or carry you to the hidden realms. And if you listen closely, between the sigh of the breeze and the lap of the water on the shore, you may hear the chords of an otherworldly song, sung on, keeping the memory of Arthur, Merlin, the lady, and Avalon alive. Alive in the land of Wales and beneath our very own feet. That's all I have for you now. Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this episode and got something from it. All of the links that you might need are in the show notes for this episode. And until next time, my name is Wishamaya. Don't forget to keep your roots deep and your dreams wild.